I never imagined my life would turn into a reality show, and yet here I am, sitting on my porch with a cup of lukewarm coffee, replaying the whole mess in my head. You see, I share custody of my 2 kids, Clara and Jake, with their mother, Sophie. We navigated the stormy seas of divorce with a semblance of civility, or at least I thought we did. But when she informed me she was being deployed for 6 months, my heart dropped. Not because she was going away, this was her career after all, but because of what it meant for our kids. Sophie married Matt, a guy I've never really clicked with. He's a nice enough guy, sure, but there's something about him that makes me uneasy, especially when it comes to my kids. As deployment day approached, it became clearer that Matt would be the primary caretaker. I felt a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach, especially after hearing some stories from friends about step-parents not being all they're cracked up to be. I had a chat with Sophie before the big day and the topic came up. She was oblivious to the little voice in my head telling me, "What if he's not a safe choice for your kids?" I mentioned my reservations, trying to tread lightly, but the look on her face made me feel like I had toppled a stack of fragile glassware. The conversation quickly turned into a heated debate. "He's their stepfather, he loves them just as much as you do," she had said, her voice rising. I tried to explain my perspective, but it felt like I was shouting into a whirlpool. When Sophie left for deployment, my anxiety only swelled. I finally had a heart-to-heart with myself and decided to reach out to her via text. "I can't let the kids stay with Matt while you're gone," I typed out, heart racing. I knew it was a bold statement, but I felt it was necessary. But the moment I hit send, I felt that familiar pit of doubt unearth itself. Did I cross a line? A few minutes later, my phone chimed, and her response was swift and vehement. "You can't just decide that without discussing it. He is their stepfather." I wanted to explain how uneasy I felt, but instead, I simply felt a wave of guilt wash over me. After what felt like an eternity of back and forth texts, I told her flat out that this wasn't about her, or even Matt, but my kids' safety and well-being. The silence that followed was deafening and uncomfortable. I hung up feeling like I had ignited a harsh storm. I thought about Clara and Jake. I could picture them standing there with us as Sophie packed her bags, tears pooling in their innocent eyes. I wanted to protect them, but was I truly the asshole for trying to create a better environment for their safety? We eventually settled on a temporary solution, where the kids would stay with my parents while Sophie was away. But the tension between Sophie and me took longer to ease. I still think about that day and wonder if I made the right call. Maybe I'm overprotective, or maybe deep down I just didn't trust Matt. Regardless, I'm still waiting for things to settle. It's hard to navigate the choppy waters of co-parenting when all anyone wants is peace. I guess I'll figure it out as we go along, one day at a time, hoping to find some clarity amidst the chaos. The weeks that followed were like a slow drip of rain, each day heavy with uncertainty. I kept rationalizing my decision, telling myself I was only acting in my children's best interest, but it felt different when I was alone with my thoughts at night. My parents had welcomed the kids with open arms, their house filled with laughter and the occasional squabble over toys, but every time I left them there, a knot would tighten in my stomach. I had spent years feeling like the steady, guiding hand, and handing that responsibility over, even temporarily, was daunting. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter one Thursday evening, pulling me from my reverie. It was a message from Sophie. My heart skipped. It had been a few days since we last spoke, and I didn't know what to expect. It read, "Can we talk?" That single sentence felt like a prelude to a storm. I knew it would lead to either a breakthrough or another wave of conflict. I hesitated for a moment, the screen lighting up my anxious face as I typed, "Sure, when?" After a few agonizing minutes, she replied, "I'm free after the kids' bedtime," which was just a few hours away. I spent those hours pacing my living room, running through countless scenarios in my head, silently rehearsing my lines, clutching at the fragile threads of our co-parenting arrangement. When the clock finally struck 8, I sat with my hands tightly wrapped around a mug of lukewarm tea, my heart thudding. The kids were happily lost in a story with my parents, and for the first time in weeks, the quiet felt like both a blessing and a curse. Sophie arrived just as the moon peeked through the clouds, casting an ethereal glow across the room. I motioned for her to sit, and there was an almost palpable tension in the air, thick enough that I could almost taste my apprehension. "Can we put everything on the table?" she started, her voice steady but laced with a subtle edge of frustration. I nodded, steeling myself for what was sure to be a tricky conversation. She spoke about her deployment, the fears and uncertainties she faced, not just with her job but the lingering anxiety about who was taking care of her kids while she was away. Matt, her husband, had been asking about when he could see them, and I could see how torn she was. She wanted to trust him, wanted to believe he could take care of the kids as well as she could, but I could hear the unspoken doubts in her words. "I just don't think he's ready," I said finally, feeling the heat rush to my cheeks. "He's only been part of their lives for a little while, and they're still adjusting. I can't just let them go without knowing they're safe." "That's what it comes down to, isn't it?" she replied, her voice rising slightly. "You don't trust him. You don't trust me." The accusation hung in the air, sharp and biting. I opened my mouth to respond but then closed it again, realizing that the truth was more complicated than that. It wasn't just distrust, it was coming from a place of love. My love for our kids made my instincts flare up like a wildfire. "I want what's best for them, Sophie," I finally said, words mostly clipped, the emotion backing them sending tremors through my chest. "But I've seen what can happen when things go wrong. What if he loses control? What if they don't feel safe? I just wanted to protect them." Her expression softened, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of understanding in her eyes. "I get it. I really do. But they need their dad, too, and I need space to know they're okay when I'm gone. Can't we find a way?" Suddenly, the walls of our conflict felt like they were shifting, and I found myself considering her plea through the lens of a mother's fear. Perhaps my stance was too rigid, too rooted in my own fears. "I'm willing to give him a chance, but we both need to establish boundaries and rules," I proposed, an inkling of compromise blossoming amidst the tension. As we talked, laying everything on the table, I started to envision a plan, one that we could both agree upon. It felt good to share the weight, and that heaviness lightened just a little. By the time we parted ways that night, I felt a cautious optimism. I still had my reservations about Matt, and perhaps that wasn't going to change overnight. But we had taken a step forward, and I clung to that. As I tucked myself into bed later, the moonlight lining my room with a silver glow, I felt a little more centered. I didn't know what the road ahead would look like, but I hoped that we could navigate it together. I fell asleep that night dreaming of balance, of co-parenting that resembled a dance, one careful step at a time, learning to trust the rhythm while keeping the safety of our children in mind. Days turned into weeks, and as Sophie's deployment drew closer, I was learning that compromise didn't signify weakness, it was a bridge toward understanding. As for an update, I'd say it's a work in progress. I still worry about Matt and keep communication open with Sophie. But every time I see my kids laughing and thriving, whether at my parents' house or during a brief visit with their dad, I understand that we're crafting a new kind of family, one rooted in collaboration and love. Maybe that's what peace really looks like for us, each day, each decision, building our way to a place where everyone feels safe. As Sophie's deployment drew closer, I was learning that compromise didn't signify weakness, it was a bridge toward understanding. As for an update, I'd say it's a work in progress. I still worry about Matt and keep communication open with Sophie. But every time I see my kids laughing and thriving, whether at my parents' house or during a brief visit with their dad, I understand that we're crafting a new kind of family, one rooted in collaboration and love. Maybe that's what peace really looks like for us, each day, each decision, building our way to a place where everyone feels safe. In those early weeks, I grappled with sleepless nights, rolling over to see the empty half of my bed, again. My thoughts circled like vultures, always settling back to Matt. I'd heard rumors about his past, how he wasn't just another face in the crowd, but a man who had stumbled through some shady days before cleaning up his act. I wanted to trust Sophie's judgment, but that nagging voice in the back of my mind made it difficult to unwind. One afternoon over coffee at our usual cafe, I shared my concerns with Sophie. She sat across from me, brow furrowed, and I could tell my worries were weighing on her heart. "You know, it's not easy for me either," she sighed, stirring her drink absent-mindedly. "I chose to be with Matt because I saw the good in him. I feel torn, really. But I'm the one in the middle." Her honesty, raw and tangible, made that barrier between us feel thinner for a moment. I wanted to assure her that I had her and the kids' best interests at heart, but the whole situation felt so convoluted. After a couple of weeks, the shifts began to show. The kids returned from Grandma's house animated, joy bubbling in their voices as they recapped the fishing trips with Grandpa and the story times that stretched late into the night. Even the way they lit up at the mention of their mom made me smile, at least they were secure in that love. But there was a shadow on the periphery when they mentioned how Matt had taken them hiking. I could feel my heart rate quicken. What had that outing entailed? One evening, I mustered up the courage to call him directly. Sophie had given me his number when I expressed my need for clarity. I wanted to get a sense of his intentions before the kids spent another weekend with him. As the phone rang, I felt a mix of anxiety and unexpected responsibility surge through my veins. "Hey, it's Jake," I said when he picked up. "Hey, man. What's up?" There was a casual ease in his voice that made me want to drown it out with 1,000 questions. Instead, I chose one. I just wanted to check in about the kids. "Yeah, they're great. We had a blast hiking the other day. They've got energy for days." I could picture him, the smile stretched across his face, but I needed more than just enthusiasm. His joy felt almost superficial. "Look, can we be real here?" I went on, taking a leap. "I'm just trying to understand the boundaries here. Their safety is my priority, you know?" A silence hung between us, thickening the air like humidity before a storm. "Totally get it, man," he replied finally, his tone shifting slightly. "You don't have to worry. I care about your kids." With that, I felt a twinge of something, a glimmer of hope, maybe? Or was it just a trapdoor opening into more anxiety? Either way, I didn't want to dismiss that hint of sincerity. As the days rolled on, I took this budding relationship with Matt as an opportunity to breathe. I started to see him more as a partner in this shared responsibility rather than just a potential threat. That shift didn't come easy. There were still moments when I felt the urge to shield my kids, to declare my territory. But then I'd witness them during their visits, their giggles echoing, loud and free, and it reminded me that every step forward was a blessing. The real test came one Saturday evening. Sophie called, her voice laced with urgency. "Jake, Matt and we had a fight. He said some things, and it got heated. Can you take the kids for a few days?" Hearing her raw vulnerability made my heart race, but I immediately tailored my response to how I'd want to react, calm, collected. "Of course, I can. Just focus on you and keeping everything together." As I squeezed my kids close for a sleepover in the living room that night, each of them curled into a little ball of comfort on the couch while they drifted to sleep. And there, in that warm cocoon of blankets and pillows, I felt that flicker of hope again. This new family we were building might just be fragile, but it was rich with potential, woven together with care. In a way, we were rewriting the narrative that life had drafted for us. Maybe, just maybe, we would find peace in this chaotic co-parenting journey, moment by tender moment. Reflecting on it now, I'm still trying to figure things out, but I believe we're finding our way. I know it won't be perfect, progress rarely is, but those smiles on the kids' faces remind me that even within uncertainty, there's a promise of warmth. And for now, I'll keep nurturing that promise, wherever it may lead us. When I first stepped into Matt's house, the air was thick with memories, his collection of vinyl records lining the walls, a half-finished puzzle sitting on the dining table, and that unmistakable scent of sandalwood from the candles he loved to burn. We had shared this space for less than a year before tragedy struck. I still remember the call like it was yesterday, the way my heart sank when his sister's voice trembled through the line, telling me he was gone. Just like that, at 33, he left this world in a car accident, leaving me to navigate the wreckage of grief while still trying to honor the life we built together. It didn't take long for his parents to come knocking. They were polite but firm, suggesting that the house should return to them now that Matt was gone. "It's family property," they said, glossing over the emotional tapestry woven in every corner. "He wouldn't have wanted you burdened with it." I remember standing in the living room, feeling like an intruder in my own life. Their voices grew louder, demanding a surrender I wasn't ready to make. Thoughts swirled inside my head. Was I being selfish for wanting to keep the place that had become a part of me? Matt had always said home was where you felt safe, and this was my sanctuary, my last connection to him. But how could I deny his parents their grief? The guilt of wanting to hold onto this space while knowing they were mourning their son weighed heavily on my conscience. After all, they'd raised him, loved him longer than I ever had. I spent sleepless nights pacing through the rooms, retracing footsteps, every laughter-filled evening, every quiet morning spent in the kitchen with the sunlight spilling in like honey. Slowly, I realized that giving up the house felt like giving up Matt, as if I would be erasing a part of our story. I turned to friends for advice, and they all had differing opinions. Some painted me as the villain, others told me that I had every right to keep the place that held my memories. With their conflicting perspectives echoing in my head, I felt even more paralyzed. Who was I in all of this? After a few weeks, I agreed to meet with his parents, hoping for a solution. They arrived, looking weary and fragile, the lines of grief etched deeper in their faces, and we sat at his dining table, the same one where we'd shared countless meals. What started as an organized discussion devolved into tears, accusations, and desperate pleas. "This is our family home," they argued, while I felt my heart shatter, wondering if I was somehow the villain of this story. Each day brought fresh unease, and I complicated the matter by starting to dream of selling the house instead, a solution that felt easier, a way to turn our shared life into something tangible, something that could finally support me instead of haunt me. But would it be a betrayal? A few days after that confrontation, tangled in thoughts and half-formed plans, I found myself sitting on his old couch. Wrapped in his blanket, scrolling through my phone aimlessly. I stumbled upon a support forum where stories of similar heartbreak were shared, and as I read, I felt a wave of understanding wash over me. The threads resonated with tales of loss, love, and rebirth. It struck me that sometimes, betrayal comes not from holding on but from losing the courage to be honest. I penned a heartfelt letter to Matt's parents, pouring out my feelings and fears, explaining my desire to cherish his memory by keeping the house. I confessed that I didn't want to erase his existence, it felt sacrilegious to me. Weeks passed, and after what felt like an eternity, they finally responded. In their reply, surprisingly gentle and understanding, they acknowledged my pain and agreed to a shared arrangement, allowing me to stay while also ensuring they could visit whenever they pleased. It was a relief, a patchwork solution that somehow felt right. I could take my time to heal, and in turn, they could reconnect with the son they had lost. Days turned to weeks as I settled into the fractured routine of grief and healing, small moments of joy seeping into my days. The last time I lit one of Matt's favorite candles, I didn't cry but smiled, remembering his laugh as it filled the room. Sure, the journey was still messy, and the scars of loss wouldn't fade quickly, but I had found a way to carry his memory forward, still not entirely sure whether I was the asshole, but at least I was no longer alone in my decision. Life, I learned, is not simple, and sometimes, dwelling in the gray is precisely where we find our way back to the light. It's funny how life has a way of tying everything up in knots before it unwinds just when you think you're at the end of your rope. After letting go of the weight of being the asshole back then, I immersed myself in the remembrance of Matt, letting those moments pull me toward healing. I decorate the small apartment we had together with things that reminded me of him, a collection of books he loved, a few of his favorite band posters that I regretfully took down but now hung again in proud defiance of how much I cherished those years together. It felt like a tribute to our time, despite the oft-discussed future that we'd never get to have. But there was still that looming question of Matt's house, the place where we shared both laughter and deep, loving conversations, and it weighed heavily on my mind after his parents reached out again. I remember exactly where I was when his mother called. I had been curled up on the couch, wrapped in a quilt that Matt had snagged from a thrift store because he loved the colors, bright orange patches that felt like the sun. Her voice was steady but trembled with an undercurrent of sadness as she filled me in on the details I'd already processed but hadn't fully faced. They wanted to discuss the house. It was a direct route back to the thoughts I tried to bury, that sense of obligation to return it to his family, to honor his memory alongside theirs, but it was also the thought of giving up a piece of my heart that kept me from saying yes. I had worried out loud to my friend Hannah about what this might mean. Would I be betraying our love? Would I be turning my back on the countless memories that literally echoed in those walls? Hannah had listened patiently over coffee, her blonde curls bouncing as she furrowed her brow. "You're not abandoning anything," she assured me, sipping her steaming latte, "you're just considering what Matty would have wanted." But the truth was, I didn't know what he would have wanted. We had never discussed what would happen if things went sideways. In my heart, I knew that building a life together in that space was an extension of our relationship, and I didn't want to relinquish it to the sharp edges of grief my memories sometimes morphed into. Days turned into weeks, each one brimming with contemplation. I thought of the countless summer nights we spent on the back porch, nursing our drinks, our dreams feeling limitless under a blanket of stars. But then, conflicting feelings began swirling in my mind. His parents deserved their piece of him too, he was their son after all. So there I was, caught in that relentless tide of internal debate, pacing the hardwood floor that hid the scuffs he had created by shuffling his feet, overthinking it, losing sleep while part of me fought against part of me while the other part stayed quiet, all in tandem. Eventually, in a moment steeped in courage derived from deep love, I called Matt's parents. My stomach flipped as I dialed their number. I could hear the hesitation in their voices when I explained how much I wanted to keep the house, thanking them for understanding even as they expressed disappointment. But to my surprise, they didn't lash out. They were gracious, even supportive, managing to communicate the essential truth. that love doesn't adhere to walls. It flows freely, molding the space within. They didn't ask for more, they just wanted to know I was okay, and somewhere in that conversation, I realized I was finally stepping into my own life, one part grieving and another part moving forward. A few months later, I found myself back at that house one bright Saturday morning, nostalgia flooding in as I prepared to host a small gathering for a few friends. As I laid out snacks and popped the cork on a bottle of wine, thoughts of Matt slipped in like a gentle breeze. I could almost hear him making jokes in the background, a playful reminder of how he used to turn even the most mundane moments into laughter. I stepped outside, leaning against the porch rail, watching the sunlight dance in the leaves overhead. A soft touch brushed the back of my mind, a whisper of reassurance that I was on the right path. By finally carving out my own space, I remembered us while allowing that to be an open door for new laughter, new memories, still honoring the love we had built. I might never fully know if I was right or wrong in my choice, but I finally felt on solid ground, free from the burden of guilt that had been my constant companion. The house was just the beginning. It wasn't the anchor that tied me to his memory but rather a vessel to traverse new journeys. As the laughter filled the air that evening, it dawned on me, the ghosts of our past can coexist beautifully, quietly guiding us, as long as we remember to live for the moments yet to come. Sitting in the midst of friends, I realized it was a world I hadn't fully immersed myself in until now. The chatter around the room was a comforting hum, punctuated by laughter and the clinking of glasses. I watched as Jenna, one of our closest friends, picked up the guitar Matt used to play. She strummed a few chords, glancing at me with that lopsided grin. "We should all sing one of Matt's favorites," she suggested. My heart flickered, half in joy and half in trepidation. It felt like an intrusion into my sacred memories, the kind you protect fiercely yet crave to share. But I nodded, the warmth of camaraderie coaxing me to lean into it. As the first notes of "Hey There Delilah" filled the room, I felt an unsettling twinge. It was his song, one that resonated with our long-distance relationship when he traveled for work, me lying on the couch listening to him through blurry phone lines. I closed my eyes for a moment, allowing the music to wrap around me like a gentle embrace. Instead of sorrow flooding my senses, I found fragments of joy rising within me, memories flashing like starlight. By the time Jenna finished the song, I was smiling, knee-deep in nostalgia yet buoyed by the laughter echoing around me. I looked around, and my friends were there, sharing in the moment, each of them carrying their own piece of Matt with them. Emily, with her wild spirit, was mixing cocktails in the kitchen, trying to recreate his infamous mojito. "Totally nailed it or totally failed it," she joked, and we erupted in laughter again. Yet, even amidst the warmth, I felt the shadows whispering uncertainty in my ear. The house, Matt's sanctuary, lingered at the edge of my mind. I was still torn over his parents' insistence on wanting it, the home that cradled our laughs and sheltered our dreams now looming as a point of contention. I recalled their faces, the raw pain in their eyes during the memorial, how they clung to relics of their son's life, each item a tangible piece of his existence. The texts continued, gently nudging at me, calling for decisions I hadn't yet made. That night, I slipped out to the balcony, the cool air prickling my skin. I leaned against the railing, staring at the stars, which felt so far away yet impossibly close. Did holding on to the house mean letting go or holding tight? There was a truth to letting it go that felt almost liberating, a part of me that knew Matt would want me to make memories in a space that reflected the life I was building. But there was another part, brittle and fearful, that worried letting go would mean losing him all over again. I scolded myself for these thoughts. It felt selfish to cling to a home when his parents were grieving in a way I might never fully grasp. After my friends left, I found myself wandering through the rooms, each space heavy with love and loss. I ran my fingers across the walls, the place filled with echoes of laughter, late-night talks, and raw vulnerability. This wasn't merely wood and nails, it was where I had grown as a person and where Matt and I had spun dreams together. It felt sacred. Eventually, I settled on the couch, wrapping a blanket tightly around me, half seeking comfort and half searching for clarity. In the moments that followed, I found myself reaching for my phone, not to text the parents, but to type out my thoughts. I contemplated how the house could be a kind of bridge, a way to honor Matt's legacy by hosting friends and writing and illuminating his memories. As I typed, it became clear, I didn't have to choose between keeping it and giving it away. Rather, what I truly needed was to transform it. A new purpose emerged from the grief. It could serve as a community space, a haven where Matt's spirit could linger in laughter and shared experiences. Finally, with a steady breath, I hit send on a message to his parents. I invited them to visit, expressing that while I understood their desire for the house, I envisioned a shared future where the space could be dedicated to honoring a life well lived. I knew they might not understand, and my heart raced at the thought of their reaction. My fingers trembled as I set my phone down, each heartbeat resounding in anticipation. I might still be navigating uncertainty, but perhaps, just maybe, I'd found a way through the haze. The stars twinkled above as I finally closed my eyes, letting the hum of memories blend seamlessly with the promise of new beginnings, holding tightly to the idea that love doesn't diminish, it can evolve, just as we do. So, look, I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this. I'm a single parent to a quirky 7-year-old named Lily, and life is already a bit chaotic as it is, balancing work and school schedules while ensuring my kid has a stable home environment. For the most part, I've tried to keep things light and flowing. But then there's my Aunt Claire, bless her heart, who's always had this knack for pushing my buttons. She's one of those well-meaning relatives who just can't help but give unsolicited advice, and a lot of it revolves around how I'm raising Lily. Everything from what she eats to how I let her express herself creatively, which includes glitter, a lot of glitter. Recently, we had a family gathering for my brother's birthday, and it felt like Aunt Claire was on a mission. I could see her shooting judgmental glances my way whenever she thought Lily was being too loud or too independent, like a hawk stalking its prey. Finally, when she suggested I should take Lily's art supplies away because she thought they were too messy, something inside me just snapped. I remember looking at her, my palms sweaty, and saying something like, "Aunt Claire, if you can't respect my decisions as a parent, then maybe it's best if Lily doesn't come over anymore." The room fell silent, and I instantly regretted saying it, even as the words left my mouth. I could see the shock on her face, and I immediately felt a wave of guilt wash over me. Was I overreacting? Was I really okay with cutting my kid off from one of the few safe spaces she had, just to make a stand? I could almost hear my aunt's heart breaking, but it wasn't just her heartbreak that weighed on me. I felt the burden of being the bad guy in my own family story. I tossed and turned that night, replaying the confrontation in my head, grappling with feelings of anger directed toward Aunt Claire for being so critical, and guilt for possibly taking something away from Lily that she enjoyed. A few days later, she called me, voice trembling, to ask if we could have a chat. When we met, I could tell she was hurt, but she quickly shifted gears to talking about how she feels she's just looking out for Lily. I snapped back like a rubber band. I'm doing the best I can. If you feel that I'm not, then don't come around. After that, I felt awful, but also strangely liberated. My responsibility is to Lily, to protect her joy and creativity. Weeks passed without Aunt Claire, and honestly, Lily asked about her once or twice, but I brushed it off, trying to maintain a brave front. Then the real kicker happened. I overheard Lily talking to her friend about how she didn't want to go to Aunt Claire's house anyway because adults should let kids be kids. In that moment, I felt a strange mix of pride and sorrow, and I knew something had shifted. I kept reflecting on whether it was worth it to stand my ground, and while I missed the idea of family dinners and the warmth they brought, I realized my first priority is protecting my daughter from unrealistic expectations. Time marched on, and eventually, Aunt Claire reached out to see if we could start fresh, possibly meet up for donuts at our favorite bakery. I hesitated but texted back, "Let's try." I still don't know if I'm entirely ready to forgive, but as I write this, I feel hopeful. Maybe we could learn to communicate better, create a new understanding. Who knows? Maybe even my Aunt Claire will learn that sometimes, love means letting go a little. So where does that leave me? Honestly, still a little unsure but standing firm in my convictions. AITA? I guess it's all part of this messy parenting journey. As I sat in my tiny kitchen, steam swirling up from the coffee mug cradled between my palms, I couldn't shake the mix of apprehension and anticipation that clung to me after Claire's message. It felt like pulling on an old sweater that I used to adore but had somehow forgotten the fit of. I replayed our last encounter over and over in my head. My mind flickered back to the confrontation at my son's birthday party, the glares exchanged over the toppings for the cake. "It's gluten-free, Aunt Claire, because Danny has a sensitivity," I had said, trying to keep my voice steady as she argued that I was being overprotective. Every word of my conviction had been met with a wave of indignation from her, a woman who had once been my confidant, my ally in navigating the familial chaos. I couldn't help but feel the weight of disappointment settle on my shoulders like a heavy cloak. Yes, Aunt Claire had always been a source of wisdom, her stories rich with familial lore, but somewhere along the way, respect for my parenting decisions had dissolved into a pile of unsolicited advice and judgment. So here I was, contemplating a meetup that could potentially heal old wounds while still feeling the prick of betrayal. When I agreed to try, it felt like I was tiptoeing back to a place I used to know, a place that felt welcoming yet dangerous. Would this conversation lead to understanding or reignite old arguments? Would it be a stepping stone towards rebuilding or just another attempt to bulldoze my boundaries? My phone buzzed on the table, jolting me from my thoughts. It was a reminder pinging me about the donut date. This wasn't just coffee with a friend, it involved family dynamics that felt more complicated than navigating a labyrinth blindfolded. The clatter of my son's toys in the background momentarily distracted me, grounding me in my role as a mother, the constant evaluator of who gets to influence my child's life. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that parenting is as much about creating a safe space for my son as it is about ensuring he understands the nuances of relationships. The next morning, I found myself outside our favorite bakery, the scent of warm pastries flooding my senses. Claire was already there when I arrived, her coffee in hand, her expression a strange mix of hopeful and apologetic. "Hey," I said softly, an uncertain smile creeping on my face. She looked a bit older, perhaps weighed down by life's burdens or the realization, possibly, that she had crossed lines. We chatted about the usual, the weather, what a rainstorm had done to our childhood tree fort, but there it was, lingering beneath the surface, that tension between what I hoped we could be and the reality of our strained relationship. "I know I haven't been the best aunt," Claire said, her eyes fixed on the donut display like she was trying to find the right words hiding among the pastries. I wanted to believe her, to embrace this moment, but doubt bubbled within me. It's hard for me to see you navigate parenting. I feel like I have so much to offer, but maybe it's not what you want." Her honesty was refreshing yet disarming, and I found myself wrestling with the desire to let her back into my life, while also keeping my son out of the line of fire. "I appreciate that, Claire," I replied, my heart racing. "But it's crucial for me to set boundaries, especially for Danny's sake. I want him to grow up feeling safe and understood, not under scrutiny." As I spoke, I registered the flicker of realization in her eyes, a softened understanding. We spent the next hour unpacking the layers of our relationship, trying to navigate what love looks like when respect feels fragile. I shared my experiences as a single parent, how the choices I made were never arbitrary but deeply considered, always revolving around my child's well-being. And to my surprise, Claire listened, really listened. I caught moments where her expression shifted from defensiveness to contemplation, as if she was beginning to grasp that our love might need to take on a different shape. We hugged before parting ways, an uncertain but genuine gesture. As I drove home, a sense of cautious optimism filled me. It felt like we had planted the seeds for a new beginning, though I knew they would take time to grow. Would she fully respect my parenting choices? Only time would tell. After all, trust is like a delicate flower, it takes patience to bloom again after being trampled. That evening, as Danny clambered onto my lap for story time, I felt the warmth of possibility surrounding us. Sure, I was still a little unsure, still grappling with the anxiety that came with family dynamics, but I felt lighter. AITA? Maybe in someone's narrative, but in mine, it felt more like I was pushing through the chaos, determined to carve out our peace. I sighed contentedly, holding my son tighter, hoping both Claire and I were learning that forgiveness is often found in the spaces between boundaries and bravery. That evening, as we sat on the couch with the soft light from a nearby lamp casting a gentle glow around us, I couldn't help but marvel at how sweetly innocent Danny was. He squirmed a bit, all too eager to dive into his favorite story. "Mom, read me the one with the dragon," he chirped, his little arms flapping with excitement. I grinned, the kind of smile that muscles in your face almost forget how to make until a moment like this brings it back. I pulled him closer, the sweet smell of his freshly washed hair drifting upward, wrapping around us like a comforting blanket. It was magical how one little creature had the power to transform a tumultuous day into something warm and bright, yet deep down, I still felt that twinge of unease about Claire. It's funny how life has this way of testing your limits. After our spat, I had launched into a whirlwind of introspection, replaying every argument, every well-meaning but misguided advice she'd offered, as if retracing my steps might uncover the right answer. Understanding what I wanted from our relationship was one hurdle, but keeping Danny safe from the fallout felt like climbing a mountain in stilettos. I felt at that moment, cradling the little joy in my arms, that he was my best shot at a serene future. As we settled into the story, Danny clapped and giggled at the silly voices I used for the characters. I couldn't help but feel a flicker of fear. What if Claire, in her stubbornness, couldn't respect my boundaries again? I wanted my son to grow without the weight of adult conflicts pressing down on him. The heavy thought stuck with me like a burr under my skin. When I put him to bed later, I stood in the doorway watching him drift off, the soft rhythm of his breathing echoing back to me the peacefulness I wished for our family. My phone buzzed, breaking the silence, and I nearly jumped, pulling it from my pocket. Claire was texting again. A simple message this time, thinking about that donut date. Do you think we can get it right this time? I stared at the screen, my heart ambivalent, caught somewhere between wanting to build bridges and fearing the crumbling of foundations. I typed and deleted, before finally settling on a cautious, I hope so. But there are some things we need to discuss first. I hit send, a mixture of hopeful optimism and drumming dread billowing inside me. The next morning, I sipped my coffee, staring out the window, the soft rays illuminating the world outside. I thought about how the hardest conversations often end up being the most crucial. Finding a balance between love, boundaries, and forgiveness, it felt less like a checklist and more like a dance. A complicated one. When our donut date rolled around, I wore a smile that only half masked my nervousness. Danny sat beside me, oblivious to the underlying currents, munching on a glazed treat and occasionally dipping into my plate for the sprinkles. Claire arrived, and as she walked through the bakery door, I saw a hint of the old warmth in her eyes, but behind it lay uncertainty. I took a deep breath, reminding myself of the patience that comes with healing. "Hey," I said softly, breaking the ice as we settled into a booth. "I believe in giving this a second shot. But we need some ground rules." "What are you talking about?" She responded, a hint of confusion in her voice, her brow wrinkling. I felt my heart race as I tried to articulate what I had been mulling over for weeks. "It's just, when it comes to Danny, I need you to respect my decisions as a parent." The weight of my words hung heavy in the air, shifting the mood between us. Claire's expression wavered, shifting from surprise to contemplation. "I understand. I think I've been stubborn about how I view things, and maybe it's time for a new perspective," she eventually admitted, reaching for a napkin as if to wipe away unspoken tension. As we talked, nibbling on donuts and sipping coffee, a sort of thaw took place. We laid raw feelings on the table, sharing our histories and misunderstandings, each crumb of pastry like a building block toward repairing our fractured relationship. I could see that she genuinely wanted to make amends, but the real test would be in her actions moving forward. Later, outside the bakery, Danny bounced ahead of us, trailing his fingers along the brick wall and giggling as he tried to capture every shadow cast by the trees overhead. In that moment, witnessing his innocent joy, I turned to Claire and said, "Thank you for showing up today." "Thank you for giving me the chance," she replied, her voice softer, more genuine. "I really want to be a part of his life, our lives, but I promise I will respect the boundaries you've set." As we parted ways, I felt a mixture of relief and apprehension swirling through me. Maybe I had been too cautious in some ways, but I didn't think I was the villain of this story. I was just a mom trying to carve out a safe and loving space for her son while balancing the complexities of family entanglements. I hugged Danny a little tighter as we walked home, whispering to him that life is often imperfect but always worth navigating together. As he chattered away about his favorite dragon stories, I realized that even when it feels chaotic, there's beauty and growth, both in ourselves and in relationships. So, was I the asshole? Maybe to some, but in this chapter of my life, as messy as it was, I was simply doing my best to foster love and understanding. The journey was still unfolding, but I felt ready for what came next, embracing the hope that blooms even in the darkest corners. I've always loved being the fun aunt, the one who brought the best gifts and made the best jokes, but when my sister and her husband had kids, twins, no less, it felt like someone flipped a switch. Suddenly, I was supposed to shower them with unconditional love, praise, and endless affection, but all I could feel was this nagging sense of disconnect. It's not that I didn't want to love them, I just couldn't seem to connect with them the way everyone expected. I remember visiting them a few days after they came home from the hospital. There were balloons and flowers everywhere, and my sister had that glow about her that only new parents get. The little ones lay sleeping in their cribs, swaddled tightly, and I felt this profound sense of anxiety wash over me. As I sat there, pretending to coo and fuss over them, all I could think was about how quiet it was, how distant it felt, like watching a movie through a foggy lens. I can't quite pinpoint when I started feeling this way. I think it was a few months in, during family gatherings when I noticed the way everyone else looked at the twins, as if they were the center of the universe. I'd smile and play along, help change diapers and keep an eye on them when my sister needed a break, But every time they'd giggle at their parents' silly faces or reach for their hands, a part of me would turn cold. I started to dread all the family outings, feeling more like a spectator than a participant in my sister's new life. She'd look at me with those big expectant eyes, as if waiting for me to beam with pride or joy, but all I could manage was a thin smile while my chest tightened with guilt. Was this normal? I wondered if I was a bad person for not feeling that immediate rush of love everyone keeps talking about. One evening during dinner, the twins let out their loud, high-pitched cries, genuine, baby-like wails that tore through the happy chatter. Everyone jumped to their feet like they were hitting a pause button in a sitcom, and there I was, stuck at the table, fork halfway to my mouth, wondering why no one ever seemed to notice the way I felt. That night, I confided in my close friend, who suggested maybe I was just overwhelmed or needed time. "It's okay," she said, "not everyone falls in love immediately with babies." But I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe this wasn't a phase. What if I was just not cut out to be around them? As weeks turned into months, and I continued showing up for family dinners, my heart ached because I cared about my sister, her husband, and the kids in a way that felt different from what was expected of me. When my sister called me one night, so excited about their upcoming first birthday party and insisting that I prepare a special speech as the crazy aunt, I felt the weight of my silence grow heavier. I choked out some sort of muted excitement, but inside I was torn. Could I really stand in front of everyone, professing feelings that didn't live in my heart? Would they see me as the villain in this story? The climax of my internal struggle came that day at the birthday party. There were decorations everywhere, laughter filling the air, and a cacophony of joyful chaos swirling around me. As I smiled at the little darlings, I couldn't shake the feeling of just being an outsider in my own family. When it was finally my turn to speak, I stood there, looking at those tiny faces with their cake-covered smiles. "I love you guys. I really do," I finally managed, the words feeling foreign yet necessary. And in that moment, I decided to lean into the love I could muster, imperfect and uncertain as it was. It didn't have to look like my sister's love, it just had to be mine. Walking away that evening, I felt a strange mixture of relief and confusion. I hadn't solved the problem, but maybe I didn't need to be the perfect aunt. I was learning that love can take many shapes, even ones that feel unsure. As for my sister? Well, she hasn't brought it up, but I think she knows. Maybe she could see the struggle reflected in my eyes, or maybe, deep down, she just wants me there, flaws and all. I guess time will tell if things will ever change between us. For now, I'm just trying to accept this complicated journey of love and connection, one awkward family dinner at a time. As I sat at the kitchen table, the sounds of laughter and playful squeals wafted in from the living room, where my sister's kids were ramping up for another round of their favorite game. I looked at the scattered remnants of dinner, spaghetti sauce splattered across plates, a half-eaten loaf of garlic bread, and felt that familiar churn in my stomach. It wasn't the food, I've always had a knack for cooking. No, it was the noise of joy reminding me of the gulf that seemed to yawn wider every time I sat in the midst of it. My sister, Marissa, was in her element, laughing as she tried to referee the chaos, a mixture of amusement and exasperation lighting up her eyes. I couldn't help but admire her, the way she navigated the madness with grace, her love bursting at the seams and spilling over into every corner of her home. And there I sat, a few steps back, fumbling to participate without truly understanding how to engage with the lives she was so passionately building. It made me feel like an imposter in my own family, awkward and not quite fitting the mold of the cool aunt I was supposed to be. Marissa had always been the one with the booming personality. She thrived in the company of others, drawing energy from their adoration while I often found comfort in the quiet corners, away from the spotlight. It wasn't that I didn't care about her children, I just felt a disconnect, a frayed wire in an otherwise buzzing circuit. I've often tried to connect with Lucy and Ben, aged 6 and 8, in little steps. I'd bring them treats when I visited, and I'd ask them questions about their favorite toys or the movies they liked. I wanted to understand their world, but the effort felt clumsy at times. A few weeks ago, I showed up with a brand new box of colorful markers and a stack of blank paper, hoping we could unleash some creativity together. "Look what I brought," I announced, watching eager smiles bloom like flowers. But somehow, my enthusiasm felt out of sync with theirs. They preferred the swift thrill of video games to the slower process of creating, sending me tumbling back into my insecurities. Did I even know how to be an aunt? As I caught a glimpse of my sister's easy banter with the kids, I couldn't escape the gnawing feeling that I was supposed to mirror her warmth. Maybe that was the essence of love in a family, this perfect, enveloping way of being that I struggled to emulate. It left me feeling inadequate, and in those moments, the tension would pull tight across my chest. Would they ever see me as someone who could be just as lovable, despite my hesitations? As I stared into my half-finished glass of Merlot, lost in my thoughts, I noticed Marissa glancing my way. She raised an eyebrow, and her expression shifted from amusement to something keenly perceptive, as if she could read the doubts swirling around in my mind. "Hey, wanna play with us?" Lucy's voice broke through the noise, her big eyes open wide with genuine hope. My heart fluttered, caught in the unexpected warmth of her invitation. Here was a chance to bridge the gap, to step into their world, even if it felt like a leap of faith. "I'm not very good at those games, sweetie," I replied with a hesitant smile, apologetic and self-aware. I saw a flicker of disappointment on her face, but then Ben chimed in, his enthusiasm infectious. "It doesn't matter. We'll teach you." The sheer sincerity in their voices made my heart twist in that bittersweet way. Maybe I could try. Maybe I didn't have to be perfect. In the end, I slowly made my way into the living room, resigning myself to the chaos that awaited me. The game was loud and frantic, full of the sort of competitive energy I usually avoided, one that filled me with anxiety instead of the thrill it sparked in others. I stumbled through the rules the kids shouted in tandem, mixing up characters and misinterpreting strategies, but amidst my blunders, laughter bubbled up and broke the tension like sunlight through clouds. There it was again, that feeling I often chased, the connection pulling us closer, however imperfect it was. As we played, I noticed Lucy and Ben sharing knowing glances, their laughter spilling over into my own smiles. I realized, then, that perhaps I didn't need to love them like their parents did. My love could be quieter, a whisperizing thread in their lives, invisible but strong. As the evening wound down, Marissa leaned in, her arm wrapping around my shoulder as the kids excitedly plotted their next gaming adventure. "You did good, sis. They love having you around," she said, her voice a mix of encouragement and sisterly confidence. I could feel the warmth radiating from her, a flicker of understanding passing between us. It was a moment that made the earlier conversation about love and connections feel less daunting. Maybe love doesn't always scream, sometimes, it hums softly in shared spaces, even in silence. Sitting there surrounded by laughter and chaos, I dared to believe that love could grow in unexpected ways, holding imperfections at its center, and for the first time in a long while, I felt unburdened and content, like I belonged, flaws and all. As the evening wore on, I watched my sister interact with her kids, their laughter wrapping around us like a warm blanket. The way she knelt down to tie her youngest shoelaces, turning it into a game, her eldest giggling as they made silly faces at each other, I felt the edges of my heart begin to soften, the tension of my earlier doubts easing just a little. For so long, I had been an outsider in their world, fumbling through interactions with awkwardness, feeling like I was always one step behind in terms of affection. I sipped my drink, pretending to keep up with the adult conversations around me while stealing glances at my niece and nephew, watching them scramble for toys, their joy palpable. It was exhausting trying to figure out where I fit in, but with each chuckle that escaped their lips, I began to see pieces of myself reflected back at me, children thriving in their small universe of imagination. I leaned back in my chair and tried to enjoy the noise, the clattering of Legos on the floor and the hum of animated discussions about superheroes. "Hey, Auntie! Look at this!" My niece suddenly popped up beside me, clutching a crumpled piece of paper covered in colorful scribbles. She was beaming, her eyes sparkling with pride. "I made this just for you." I took the paper from her hands, the vibrant colors swirling chaotically across the page. It was an abstract masterpiece, a jumble of shapes that could be anything from rainbows to monsters. I felt a surge of affection, not because I was suddenly head over heels for her or fulfilling a norm of being the doting aunt, but because I saw her. I saw how hard she had worked to create something for me, to share a piece of her world, and that was something to cherish. "Wow! I love it." I grinned wider than I had in weeks. Her face lit up like a Christmas tree, and in that instant, I knew this small exchange was a step forward, not a leap, but still something. I felt a stir of belonging that was heavy with imperfections. I looked over to my sister, and for a brief moment, our glances locked. Her smile was knowing, a shared acknowledgement of the work both of us were putting into our relationships. As the night progressed, I began to breathe a little easier, my laughter joining the cacophony of voices, allowing myself to be swept up in the nuances of family life. For several more hours, we huddled together around a mess of dinner plates, overflowed drinks, and overwhelmed conversations. When I left that night, I felt lighter than I had in ages. It was still going to be a long road, I wasn't naive enough to think that everything would magically change overnight. But I found solace in understanding that I didn't need to love my sister's children the way she did, just my version of love, whatever that might look like, was perfectly valid. Perhaps love could be like this beautiful mess we'd created that night, a patchwork of doodles, varied textures, shades, and overlapping lines. Weeks turned into months, and as the holidays approached, I couldn't shake the sense of change that lingered in the air. I started offering to babysit occasionally, wanting to break through the barrier of unfamiliarity that had once made me feel like an outsider. I found myself emerging from my shell, directing silly puppet shows with mismatched socks, playing hide and seek in the corners of their home, and reading story after story until nap time was unavoidable. Each time I returned home, I would hang up my coat and find a small piece of my newfound warmth nestling in the pocket, a token of connection I didn't realize I was building. Looking back on that conversation with my sister, I realized how important it was for her too. She'd carved out space for me to be precisely who I was, without any expectations of perfection. It was in the little moments, the fleeting glances and shared laughter, that love unveiled itself in new forms. Perhaps we all could lean into our uncertainties, knowing that something beautiful could stem from the chaos, the imperfections, and the undying effort to bridge gaps, one family dinner, and one awkward exchange, at a time. I still think about that night occasionally, especially when I spy my niece decorating another crayon masterpiece, or my nephew zooming around with a superhero cape flapping in the wind. Love is like a starting point on a canvas, it unfolds endlessly, and I'm beginning to understand that being part of their world is just as special as creating my own path too. And in this ongoing journey, I'm learning to embrace the surprises and to keep the dialogue open, because maybe it's in the imperfections that we find the most authentic forms of connection. I never thought that my home-cooked meals would become a point of contention, especially when it came to my boyfriend's kids. When I first met Jake, he mentioned he had 2 children, and I braced myself for the whirlwind that would follow. But I didn't expect to fall in love with their chaotic energy. They were just 10 and 14, and while I found their quirks endearing, I was constantly reminded that they were also master negotiators, especially when it came to mealtime. It all came to a head one Sunday evening when I decided to whip up a hearty vegetable stir-fry. I'd spent a good 2 hours chopping veggies, prepping rice, and stirring in a homemade sauce, humming happily to my playlist as I filled the kitchen with mouth-watering aromas. When I set the table, I felt a sense of pride. Jake's kids, however, traipsed in and paused as if I had served them something alive. "What's that?" The younger one, Lily, wrinkled her nose. "Ew, I'm not eating that." The older one, Ben, joined in. "Yeah, can we just order pizza instead?" My heart sank. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that this was a new family dynamic, and kids have a knack for testing boundaries. "Guys, I really put a lot of effort into this, and it's what's for dinner. You can eat it, or if you're not hungry, that's okay too." My voice was calm, but internally, I wrestled with a potential backlash. There was a powerful silence, thick with disbelief. I felt the stakes rise as they exchanged glances, confusion and defiance dancing in their eyes. "But it's gross," Lily protested, sinking into her chair with arms crossed. Anger flared up in me. Was I supposed to cater to their every whim? I felt a wave of frustration as their protests grew louder, but I forced myself to stay grounded. "Look," I said, trying to keep my tone steady, "I get that it's not your favorite, but you're old enough to try new things. How about just one bite? You can always have dessert afterward." The quiet stretched. I was ready to crack if they kept it up. The moment felt critical, like a lit fuse that could either fizzle out or explode. Finally, Jake stepped in, looking concerned as Ben and Lily glared at me. "Hey, lifelong battle with vegetables aside, can we at least try to support each other?" he said, trying to lighten the moment. With dramatic sighs that could shatter glass, they slid their forks into the stir-fry, which I must admit looked inviting enough. As they reluctantly chewed, I could see them grimace, but something unexpected happened next. Ben declared it almost edible, while Lily muttered that she could tolerate it if it meant dessert. We ended on a humorous note, and as the dinner progressed, I found myself laughing alongside them, the earlier tension dissipating. However, the aftermath gnawed at me. Had I overstepped a boundary? Was I that tyrannical figure in their lives that made mealtimes a game of compliance? Later, after I tucked the kids in, Jake brought up our earlier standoff gently. His hand warming my back. "I think you handled it well for a first time," he said. "It takes time for them to accept a new routine, you know?" I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Although I felt uncertain, a part of me appreciated that I stood my ground in an unfamiliar parenting territory. Sometimes cooking for a family is more than putting food on the table, it's about navigating new personalities and expectations. If I ever end up becoming a real part of their lives, I would need to find that balance between discipline, understanding, and letting them choose their battles. I'd like to think I'm on the right track. I might even try another stir-fry next week, but not without a little prep work and maybe a fun cooking session with them beforehand. I'd want them on board, not just as a meal plan but as part of this crazy family journey we were on together. As I sat at the kitchen table, the remnants of last night's stir-fry still lingering in my mind, I couldn't shake off the feeling of uncertainty about how to move forward. The whole idea of being with someone who had kids was both exhilarating and daunting. I tried to visualize family meals as these blissful moments, laughter ricocheting off the walls, but in reality, I had clashed with Chris's kids over food more often than I'd care to admit. 11-year-old Ava had her heart set on pizza, the classic kid's choice, while her younger brother, Max, preferred nothing but chicken nuggets. And so, standing at the stove last night, chopping broccoli and bell peppers, I felt my resolve wane. Eat what's for dinner or don't eat at all, I'd said, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders like a heavy blanket. The words had slipped from my mouth before I could catch them, a hardline stance that resonated into the silence of the kitchen, slicing through any chance of warmth. I understood it was unrealistic to expect them to embrace my culinary enthusiasm overnight. I thought about it long after dinner, my stomach heavy with the green beans I'd forced myself to eat, and I just couldn't shake that gnawing regret. Had I been too harsh? I would define my approach as teaching them to appreciate food, but in what way had I truly connected with them? After they had left the table, I contemplated the gap that had formed. Chris had tried to mitigate the situation, reassuring them and promising pizza tomorrow while sending me a poignant look, part apology and part "what were you thinking?" I understood he was in a tricky position, caught between his partner and his kids. That moment of clash weighed heavily, not just in the context of dinner but in the greater effort of blending our lives. I loved Chris, and I could see why this family meant the world to him, but after our first big rocky dinner together, I felt more like a bumbling intruder than a partner. The truth nagged at me, I craved connection, not confrontation. The shimmering vision of us coming together over a shared meal felt threatened by my own missteps. Were my expectations too high? I could sense my friends' voices echoing in my mind, suggesting a more lenient path, one that allowed kids to express their preferences without feeling bullied by adult tastes. I mulled over the idea of a pre-dinner meeting, a vote, perhaps? Pizza, stir-fry, or even tacos? I could picture the kids researching together, scrolling through recipes, maybe even sharing their wild ideas with me while chuckling over imagined concoctions. The next day, as the sun peeked through the kitchen window and spilled onto the counter, I took a deep breath and texted Chris. "Can we set a family dinner meeting tonight? I think it could be fun. Just the kids and us, no pressure." To my relief, he responded almost immediately. "Sure. I think they'll love it." I felt hope flutter within me as we assembled that evening around the kitchen table, the atmosphere different already, with art supplies scattered across one side as a backdrop to our conversation. "Okay, team, before we plan our dinner, how was your day?" I asked, trying to start light. Max was engrossed in his drawing, which was surprisingly good, while Ava had found a way to channel her impatience into a few clever comments about vegetables being growing food. We talked and laughed, and slowly I noticed a change in our dynamics. When I suggested we had to make a plan for the week, they didn't immediately groan. Instead, Ava perked up, saying, "Can we have taco night? We can make them." And just like that, the children were engaged. They reveled in the idea of crafting their own tacos, discussing toppings, and experimenting with what they'd like to adorn this new creation. I felt a warmth bloom in my chest, that elusive sensation of family forming the way broth warms soup. I took a step back and decided to let them lead. After all, cooking was a journey, not a destination. Dinner rolled around the next week, and together we peeled avocados, shredded cheese, and dashed spices back and forth like our own culinary dance, the kitchen buzzing with chatter and laughter. Chris must have felt the shift too, because his smile spanned ear to ear as he watched the three of us concoct our masterpieces. That night, not only did we eat together, but we also forged a deeper sense of understanding. As I watched Max carefully pile his toppings, his face a mix of concentration and delight, I realized this was more than just about making meals. This was about making memories, bridging experiences, and, hopefully, inviting them into my world just as they welcomed me into theirs. A week later, while we all sat on the couch, the remnants of dinner still wafting through the air, Ava turned to me and asked shyly, "Can we try that stir-fry again next week?" I chuckled, knowing she had probably come to accept that sometimes we have to eat things we might not prefer. "Absolutely, if we can do it together," I replied, feeling a soothing sense of victory wash over me. As I leaned back and heard their laughter fill the room, I finally recognized the beauty in our shared chaos, a family finding its rhythm, with all its flavors, challenges, and laughter. The journey ahead, filled with learning and experimenting, felt like the perfect adventure. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had crossed a threshold together, from mere coexistence into a budding family dynamic that was starting to feel genuine. Each evening, the dinner table became more than just a place to eat, it transformed into a communal hub of laughter, arguments over whether to have chicken nuggets or homemade tacos, and surprisingly deep conversations about their day. I found myself cherishing the little moments, the way Oliver would scrunch his face at broccoli but listen while I told him about how important it was for his growing body, or the way Ava started to try new foods, albeit slowly, but it felt like small victories on this journey of culinary diplomacy. One particular Saturday, we took my idea of a cooking session and made it a whole event. I took them to the local market, and it was incredible to see their eyes light up at the array of colors, bright red tomatoes, vibrant orange peppers, and greens that looked like they belonged in a painting. The way they picked out their favorite ingredients to create our next family meal made me feel like we were all inches closer to blending our lives. The joy wasn't just in the act of cooking, it was in each tiny choice they made, how their personalities shone through. As we prepped dinner that night, laughter echoed along with the clattering of pots and pans. There was flour everywhere, Ava had managed to get some on her nose, and even Oliver, who had once been wholly indifferent toward helping, had a spatula in hand, flipping pancakes with a kind of determination that made me proud. I wanted to capture that moment forever, the three of us dancing around the kitchen like we owned the place. As we sat down together with plates filled with pancakes drizzled with syrup and fresh fruit, the atmosphere was warm and inviting. My heart felt full. Yet, amidst the laughter and antics, something did gnaw at me. I was reminded of that initial conflict. Should I have been firmer with my expectations? It danced in the back of my mind like an uninvited guest. I recalled the times I made comments about their choices or pushed them to embrace something they initially refused. I wondered if I was setting them up for failure in adapting to a household that didn't bend to their every whim. I let it linger in my thoughts, willing to explore the line between being a nurturer and a figure of authority. But every smile from them, every bit of that sincere joy we created together felt like an affirming hug around my doubts. That upcoming week, we tried the stir-fry together. They didn't just help, they took ownership. Ava insisted on chopping the vegetables, creating little shapes out of the bell peppers like they were pieces of art, and Oliver surprised us all by deciding he wanted his pieces a bit bigger because, in his words, everything tastes better in massive bites. Watching them engage in our meal with excitement and investment settled something deep within me, the realization that as challenging as it might be to find the right balance, it was also utterly rewarding. I felt like I was gaining not just their trust, but a glimpse into how our little family was beginning to develop our rhythm, a rhythm that celebrated our mismatched notes as much as the harmonies we found along the way. Fast forward to a sunny Sunday a few weeks later, and I found myself standing in our kitchen, a vibrant smell wafting through the air as we prepared an extravagant dinner meant to celebrate the end of the week. After weeks of navigating some bumps and missteps, the kids still had their moments of pushback, but I had noticed they were beginning to voice their preferences more constructively. As I was stirring a pot, Ava casually shared how she appreciated being listened to during our cooking sessions. Oliver chimed in that he liked knowing he could suggest things without judgment. It hit me harder than I expected. Here, amidst the flour and chopping boards, we were building something real. Reflecting on it later that night, I realized I had been questioning myself an awful lot. What age do you cross from merely being a parent figure to someone they could genuinely trust? The love I felt for those two kids grew each day, and the connection we forged deepened beautifully. Maybe, just maybe, family really is about creating a safe space, where all the flavors are welcome, where every spice has its purpose. I laid in bed that night, the remnants of laughter still echoing in my mind and warmth radiating from my heart, and for the first time, I believed we were truly becoming what I had always imagined we'd be, a family.